Picture this: a UK consumer, founder, and CEO is watching the market shift. They're seeing certain competitors quietly roll back their focus on ESG and double down on cost cutting and short term gains. After years of disruption, the pandemic, inflation, and ongoing political uncertainty, they are feeling the pressure too. Growth has been hard won, and every decision counts. They're proud of the values their business has been built on. Purpose is part of their DNA. They're asking if this commitment is helping the business thrive, or could it be holding it back? This is Alternatively Speaking, the Grant Thornton podcast, where we explore the healthy tensions that shape modern business. So, is purpose a luxury in tough times, or can it be a driver of growth and resilience? I'm journalist and broadcaster Samantha Simmons, and I'm delighted to be joined by two people who bring unique perspectives to this discussion. Carolyn Hicks, Head of Transformation at Grant Thornton, helps businesses reimagine operating models and put people at the heart of change without losing sight of their culture and values. She knows what it takes to balance values with commercial realities. And next to her is Piers Linney, entrepreneur, investor, and former BBC Dragon's Den investor with experience across a range of sectors. Welcome to you both. Great to have you on the podcast. Let's start with this very idea of purpose. What does it mean to you, Piers?
It's quite a complicated subject, but it pervades everything, essentially. And I think that most great businesses started with a dream, a vision, and a purpose. And that kind of foundation really has kind of played Apple, all the big successful businesses. Sky, I work with as well, it started with a purpose really. So the question today is going to be, what does that mean going forward? The world's changing, attitudes are changing, the consumer's changing. I think that when I was sort of growing up and started building businesses, the purpose really was that it was making money, to be quite frank. But increasingly, you're seeing the group of stakeholders you've got to sort of report to and be responsible for is growing. But the next generation, so let's say Gen Z, my Gen Alpha, and my children, they're all about purpose.
Where does diversity and inclusion and ESG fit into that purpose nowadays, do you think?
So if you go back in time, the idea behind, all the philosophers and organisation, right, was that you deliver value to society that allows you to exist. It's a social contract, essentially. So what you're now seeing is that social contract should be fair. The top of organisations, across all the way through an organisation, should look like the society it serves and the customers it serves. Now, we all know they don't. So the question is, how do you change organisations so they get a fair chance? Fair sort of a go at it like me. And the question is very hard to do. So when you're at the bottom, you can I do this is a lot of work on this in DEI, you can change things. But as you move towards the top, it starts to get harder and harder and people start to give up. But at the end of the day, diverse businesses, inclusive businesses, they're more profitable, they're more successful, and they're simply better places to work. And where's talent going to go and work in the future? In those businesses, or the ones that haven't bothered, or the ones that gave up on it because of a political wobble?
Okay, Carolyn, you're nodding away there. What would you say purpose means to businesses that you interact with?
I think there's three different types. Fundamentally, there's purpose absolutely everywhere. I think you use the term, every business that is in existence is there for a reason. I wouldn't have been able to get to London today if the train wasn't there, because I would have been able to get here. There's purpose in having that business there. Of course, it needs to make money because it needs to be able to run itself. Then there's organisations that were set up from the purest purpose perspective. And then other organisations, and this is where I think the challenge lies, have it of an overlay. They tag purposeful things onto their core business and they see it as an add-on. And that's where the challenge comes when you talk about the profit versus purpose challenge.
So would you say that when times are tough economically, then perhaps purpose becomes a luxury for some businesses?
So I fundamentally disagree that it is a luxury, because I think it's simply about the how you do what you choose to do. And actually, if you can, I'm going to say square the circle, but it's actually a triangle that I have in my head of you're balancing all the time the outcome, the cost, and the choice of how you do something. If you get that right, you can tick the profit box and you can tick the purpose box simultaneously. And of course, we can't forget the people. in all of that. To your point about talent, if you manage to balance the profit and the purpose in that symbiotic relationship that it actually is, you are going to attract the best talent, and it will become even more self-fulfilling prophecy.
So I totally agree. I don't think it's a luxury. I think businesses that are kind of pulling back, they're reducing budgets. At some point, the tide will turn, and it'll be anything people want to do again, and they'll be able to catch up. So the point is that it's that conflict between profit and purpose, ESG. And in the institutional land, especially investment, they've never really quite squared that circle, because your obligation to your investors and stakeholders is to maximize profit. So you can't really say, look, I'll make less money because this business does good. You can't do that literally, legally, essentially. So that's been really hard to do. And I've been involved in businesses that I see as a force for good, so social businesses. I've been involved in for-profit businesses. And that's something we need to kind of get right. So the institutions can't get it right. So you internally within the business, you have to get it right and find that balance.
And how do you do that?
So again, it's being part of your DNA. What is if you go shopping with my daughters, right, I pick things up. They go, why are you picking that up, Mum? What do you mean? Well, I read here, and they're going through, what is the label? Where did it come from? Anti-slavery, anti-everything. And I think, wow. And then you look at it and think, well, this is the future consumer. So if you can't show provenance and there's a real purpose, I think I don't care what you do, actually, even your financial services, you're going to find yourselves at a disadvantage. So you've got to be part of your DNA, and it's got to come through in everything you do, because the consumer of the future, they've got AI to help them do the research, right? Because they're not going to be on the internet. It's going to be their agents going to know what they think, what they like, what they don't like. And it's going to go and talk to your agents and do the deal, essentially. E-commerce will become like high-frequency trading. So in that paradigm, you can't hide. And that's the point. You can have almost perfect information, perfect markets. We won't be able to hide by ESG washing, as you would say.
Some would say there's an argument for, look, times are tough and people are watching their budgets, businesses as well as just the ordinary shopper on the street. And actually, if you can offer something that perhaps doesn't have a purpose but is cheap, then people are going to go for that.
So I think you can do that in the short term, but I think, as I was saying, long term, hiding. In the end of the day, if you're producing a product that competes with somebody else, and there's something in your supply chain that, let's just say, isn't doing the right thing, okay, you can hide it now. You can wash over, ESG wash it, whatever you want to call it. In the future, you will not be able to do that. It will be almost like perfect information. And that profit you're making today, in the long run, there will always be, let's face it, a market for the discounters, the cheap product. But in the middle market, in perfect information, those companies long term will not succeed.
And do you think businesses get that, Carolyn?
I think some businesses absolutely some businesses get it. But there are still quite a lot of businesses who genuinely don't, and they are laser focused on the financials without really having that broad view of what is this balanced scorecard that we actually need to run our business off. And in my mind, I'm mentally thinking about the 4-box model, but actually I think it's beyond that, because it is your profit, it is your people, it's your customer, it's your broader stakeholders. As you were mentioning before, there's so much pressure. But it all comes back to, as well, the economic way in which we've set up the world. We are beholden to this kind of capitalist structure currently. It's not going to change in my lifetime. It may change in the future. So you do have to make a profit, because if you haven't got a profit, you can't have a purpose, because to some extent or another, profit does enable purpose. But back to the point at the beginning, it should be a symbiotic relationship.
And those companies that you see who don't get it, who are just focused laser-like, as you say, on profit, why is that? Is that down to the leadership who are just so determined to deliver that profit, or have they not got the right people in the organisation sort of lower down to enable that to happen?
So leadership have to be able to communicate the vision for the organisation. They have to enable people to live and breathe the strategy. So ultimately, the organisation sets its strategy and then enables people to deliver that. Kind of, I guess, in the traditional pyramid style of an organisation. If you're not clear enough on what it is you're trying to achieve and how, and this is the important word, the how, because there's many ways to skin these cats, some of which are purposeful, some of which focus on, inclusion and diversity that really enable your environmental agenda. It's that how bit that's important.
And do we see Gen Z, Gen Alpha, when they're out there looking for the right job, be a lot more discerning about that, Piers?
100%. People now looking at careers and job opportunities. They're looking at the business. They're looking at who's on the board. What does the board look like? Is it diverse? Do they look like them? Have they got a policy? If you're, lots of people now. If you're neurodiverse, for example, and that's a big spectrum, can they accommodate you? So everyone's looking for these things now, and the talent of the future is going to go work in organisations that understand who they are and are willing to support them. Because increasingly, you look at I work in big companies, and you look at all the different kind of ESG policies and all the different groups within the organisation, be it armed forces or it could be gender, sexuality, lots of them. There's a huge number of them, and they look for organisations that put money behind these things. Well, I always say that you can look at an organisation and look at people's comp plans. If you can't see in comp plans some measure or some performance metric or somewhere where they get paid for delivering their purpose, ESG, DEI, whatever you want to call it, the organisation doesn't really care about it.
And when you've invested in multiple companies, you're on Dragon's Den, you're an investor now, you work for British Business Bank as well, supported them. When people come to you with an idea, what gets you going? What really motivates you to invest when it comes to purpose?
Well, it depends where you're on the spectrum of a business. So if it's a startup, like Dragon's Den, for example, you're investing in the people. You're investing in the individuals standing in front of you. The idea to some extent, obviously got to hold water, but it's more, can they put up with the sacrifices, the hard work they're going to have to make to deliver that business? Because by the time they deliver that business, it won't be that business. It'll evolve, pivot over time. That's it. As they get bigger, if you're investing in a utility company, the whole senior leadership could disappear and you could just get another one. It wouldn't matter to carry on. So you've got that kind of spectrum, really. But I think all the way through it, increasingly, it's going to be purpose. Not because of the entrepreneur or the management team, it's because their customers are going to expect it. And increasingly now, small companies compete with big companies. And the small companies, the influencers, they have provenance. You know who they are. You've seen them grow up. You've grown up with them. And they're the ones people increasingly are buying off at TikTok shop.
Yeah. Is it about storytelling? Is it about having something that convinces people to be your customer or client or whatever it is, because you are telling a convincing story about what your purpose is?
Yeah, so even a TikTok shop, you can still tell a convincing story.
Yeah.
But I still think that people eventually, and you always see this, especially on social media, eventually you get found out.
Yeah. Have you experienced that at all, that you've invested in somebody or something? Well, either being found out or the other side of the coin, that you've made an investment or believed in someone and they've let you down and they haven't been true to what you thought they were.
Yeah, all the time. But that's not really purpose. I say that's just the fact that they couldn't deliver, or they weren't clear on what they were trying to do, or they couldn't execute. But it's really, and you think, it's about execution of a strategy, and this should be a core part of your strategy, because you can have a political wobble globally, and you can sort of reduce your budgets. That's your prerogative. You can do that. It's your business. You've got to get your balance right. But if you turn it off, when it comes back, right, and the new generation are now 5 years older, you're going to find it very, very hard to catch up.
I was just going to say, because if I think about social mobility in Grant Thornton is, and we've used the word DNA so many times already, but it's absolutely ingrained in the DNA. Many of our partners, including me, are examples of social mobility live in the business, and you can't turn it off. It's not a thing you can actually turn off, because it's here. It's, we attract people to come and work for us that have, grown up and have managed to, I guess, outweigh the expectations that maybe people had of them as children, because they've been given opportunities through their career that they've then latched onto. You can't turn that off. It's not something you can not do anymore, because it's a living, breathing thing in and of itself. So if it's truly embedded, you won't have a choice to turn it off, because it's simply back to the point how you do something.
Let's talk a bit more specifically about diversity and inclusion. You talked about sort of political movements and machinations across the world, and we've seen that in the United States, the shift away from diversity and inclusion, very much so. What impact are you seeing that have in the UK and globally?
So it gets conflated with this, wokeness, right? And that's just the wrong way to look at it. If you're talking about, I always say, and I didn't make this up, I think it was somebody else, but diversity is simply being asked to the party, making it accessible, get to the start line. Okay, inclusion is being asked to dance. Right? So that is where now you're in an organization, wherever you are, and you feel part of it, you feel as though you belong there. Now, I went to Milltown Comprehensive School, right? I ended up being, I'm a social mobility story as well. I ended up working law in the city, the banker at Credit Suisse, made a bit of money. And I kind of PR'd myself, really. I thought I would get found out because I know people, and then my school, did my A-levels twice. And when I did the Secret Millionaire program on 2011, when it went out, I was driving my Milltown and my Porsche, and my phone lit up, and it said, "I never knew you went to an awful school like that." And I was kind of like, "You never asked." What you should do really is ask. Now, I think the world's a bit more accommodating now. We probably wouldn't have to do that today in the city, but I kind of waste a lot of energy doing that, and people really shouldn't have to do that. So the key is that all you're saying to people is, it's the right thing to do. It makes your business more profitable. Just letting people get to the start line. That's all you're asking. After that, it's down to them. How you support them, the hard work, the training, the education. You're not asking for any kind of help in the race. Just let everyone get to the start line, no matter who you are, where you came from.
Yeah. I didn't know that my job that I do now existed when I was at high school. I had no idea, parents had no idea. It took me a long time to get to even the point where I was really let in the door, to your point. So the work that businesses do with school children is vitally important.
How can leaders stay committed, do you think, to long-term purpose when their short-term reality is dominated by so many pressures like cash flow, obviously margin pressures, operational firefighting, things like that? Do you have any strategies that might work?
I think it's taking that step back. I mean, we work with organizations all the time who are saying to us, right, we need to grow, but we need to keep our cost base down here. Or actually, we are where we are, our market's stagnating, but we need to manage our cost. We work with them to look at all the moving parts of where they're spending that cash. We understand their consumer base. We understand what their consumers want. They then need to decide where they get their biggest ROI from. And in looking at that, again, back to the point that this is embedded, that will show up with the right answers for them. That won't be, and you're going to cut this, this, and this. Yeah, they might have to, we said this before, they might have to pare back on some investment in volunteering or giving, a certain percentage of their profits back to some charitable organization. But inherently, from an ESG point of view, it shouldn't need to change. But they need to hold fast with that. And I find it very confusing why anybody would even suggest something such that you would need to row back from an I&D perspective. It makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever when business need diversity of thought. And I think that's the thing that gets lost when we talk about I&D, because it's about the diversity of thought that is brought to the party, not, what race or religion or gender somebody might be.
One of the issues was that a lot of big companies in the US were worried that if they had DEI on their website, they wouldn't get government contracts, right? And it's kind of flown down from there because lots of UK companies are subsidiaries of US large companies, right? So a lot of it was because of that. So I think a lot of companies that aren't directly impacted by that, even some that I work with, they haven't changed the strategy. They might have changed some job titles.
Right.
It's a bit.
Yeah. So it's gone a bit underground.
A little bit maybe, but the budgets haven't really changed. So I think a lot of organizations, that kind of blowback in many ways was those organizations, ones that are worried that having this big badge is going to upset somebody and impact their top line. And the impact to their top line was going to be a lot worse. And they see the impact of not having as much of a budget focused on those initiatives. So that was a trade-off, I think, and that's going to fade away eventually.
Oh, yeah, it will. I mean, but there is definitely a difference, and we're feeling it. And again, we were talking to clients about this the other day in terms of the shape of what you do within an organization around I&D now. And I know for us in particular, And as with many organizations, you have special interest groups of the same type of people in the special interest groups. It's actually not necessarily that helpful, because what you need to do is get different groups to interact and know and learn about each other. So we've shifted some of those and creating like an interfaith group, for example.
So, Piers, you've built and backed high growth companies. Where have you seen purpose genuinely improve performance and productivity?
I think it's when organizations from the top management or the founder all the way through to people actually on the coalface, they understand it. So you're all sitting on the bus and you're all pointing in this, looking in the same direction. I think any organization, small or large, that I've been involved in, where that isn't clear and people are sort of pulling in different directions, it's just wasted time, resource, and energy.
So, Karen, we often hear this idea of who owns purpose inside a business. Some people say HR owns the culture and perhaps purpose. We're hearing from Piers it comes from leadership. What's your experience?
Well, no one owns culture. No one owns purpose. It's a collective. The vision has got to come from the leadership, but everybody has their part to play in enabling that and making it happen. I think just to the point that you were saying then, my mind was going back to an organization that I used to work for that was purpose driven at its heart. It was set up to serve and it genuinely was set up to serve a purpose. It then became a profitable and successful organization. That organization went through its financial difficulties to the point that bits of that organization were going to go bust. But because of its purpose and because the people were talented and attracted to that organization, they wanted to save it. It then went back into profit again. So the purpose means that people will stick with those organizations in the really tough times. So when you're going through these economic cycles that always happen and will forever happen, people will retain in those organizations and get it back to where it needs to be, just ride out those storms.
Of course, running any business, not everybody in a boardroom is going to agree on everything all the time. The same goes for purpose. Do you have any advice for when there are these tensions, these difficulties, and how best to navigate them, Carolyn?
So I think there's a couple of things. Depending on the nature of the CEO and how they choose to run their business, sometimes if they're quite directive, they just need to say, this is what we're doing, off we go. If they're more collaborative than that, it can be really helpful to get external independent facilitation in. A lot of what we do in our work is simply being the facilitator to a conversation to really air the pros, the cons, the benefits, the risks of a decision that is before a group of leaders, and actually setting that out super clearly and having a conversation around it with an independent body to help it. It can just really cut through that politics because we take the emotion right out of it.
Piers?
I'd agree with that. I've never really been in a boardroom where there's been a big issue sort of falling out about purpose as such. But sometimes if you actually scratch off the surface of what the issue is, a lot of it can be down to the fact that there isn't a clear purpose. Because that's what I was saying before. You've got people pulling in different directions. So you would have thought that if there's a clear understanding of what the purpose is, there's less likelihood of having board meetings where people don't agree on the big picture. They're always going to disagree on the detail.
Yes.
Which is what boards are there for.
Okay, let's finish on thinking about some practical advice or take-homes. What's the best advice or lessons learned, Piers, that you have when it comes to purpose?
So if it's not clear, again, from leadership all the way through the organization, you need to make sure it is clear and that every level, especially large organizations, every level understands it and can push it down in a way and communicate it. That's the key, actually. And communicate it in a way that the next, if you talk about layers, the next layer down can understand and actually act upon it. And then make sure that even your purpose actually in some way is reflected in performance measurement. Because if it's not, people aren't going to really, they have no incentive really to make sure it happens. Because some people are very purpose driven, some aren't, that work for you. And even the ones that aren't should be thinking, well, actually, I need to take that into account because I'm going to get paid more.
And I think the advice would be it has to make sense for your business. So it has to be connected with your strategy and what you're trying to do. So For example, we talked before about, getting out into schools. If you're a accountancy firm, and you need to recruit people in the future, well, get out there, get into the inner city schools, talk to them about your careers. Whatever you're doing has got to make sense in the context of what you're trying to do. This is not a one size fits all thing, and you can't just go and pick 4 things off the shelf and tag them on. Otherwise, they will just get lost when the tough times come.
That's it for this episode of Alternatively Speaking. My huge thanks to Carolyn Pearce. Thank you. My thanks to you for watching and listening. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you are.